Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Amber Danius. I am a Young Leaders Cabinet member, and I just want to remind everyone that this event is being recorded. So if you're on camera, maybe be mindful of your face. But anyways, welcome and welcome to our second annual Young Leaders Cabinet virtual event on protecting choice. This event is super special this year because we're just 2 days away from the year anniversary of the fall of Roe and, of course, the end to safe abortion in many states across our country. And with us today are two Young Emerge alums from two very different states. First, we have South Carolina State Representative Heather Bauer, and we have Maryland Delegate Jheanelle Wilkins. So we will first hear from these two powerful lawmakers, and then we'll transition to a moderated Q&A with our Young Leaders Cabinet members, KT Coleman and Aaron McGrath. So Representative Bauer, we will start with you, and then you can hand it off to Delegate Wilkins.
Okay, thank you for having us tonight. As she mentioned, I'm Representative Heather Bauer. I am in Columbia, South Carolina, and represent the southeast portion of that city. I was newly elected into office in January, but I hit the ground running. Graduated from Emerge back in 2019. Never thought running for office was in my cards. I came from, my mother was a single mother of 5 on every public assistance program we could possibly have. And, public going to vote every year was just not something we did in my family. But it wasn't until 2016 that I started to see what my current representative was doing and not doing, and said I could do better. So I went through Emerge program, which changed. I left my first meeting and I remember getting in my car and being like, I can do this, and calling all my friends and be like, what can I run for? What can I do? And actually I ran 3 different times before I flipped the seat, and I was the only Democrat to flip a seat in the entire state of South Carolina last year. So I'm super proud of that. Had an amazing team behind me, and been working hard on all the issues that impact women in South Carolina, particularly the abortion issue, which I'm sure we're going to get into. So Delegate Wilkins, we'll love to pass it over to you.
Thank you so much. And I'm so excited to meet you and share the stage with you, especially as lawmakers in different contexts. So thank you for your fight and your leadership, Representative. Hi, everyone. I am Delegate Jheanelle Wilkins. I represent District 20 in Maryland, which is the Silver Spring, Tacoma Park, White Oak areas, right outside of Washington, D.C. And I have served in the legislature since 2017. I was actually appointed during my time at Emerge. So I graduated from Emerge as well, and I'm class of 2017. So during the time that we were going through the class, I was going through my appointment process. The reason I was appointed is because many of you may know the name Jamie Raskin. He was my state senator. And when he ran for Congress, I worked on his campaign, that created a vacancy in our district. And so our local Democratic Party does the appointments when there are vacancies. So I was first appointed in 2017, and then I ran on the ballot in a competitive race in 2018, and I was just reelected last year in 2022. So I have served this is my 7th year, and I wear a number of hats in the Maryland legislature. I serve as the vice chair of the Ways and Means Committee, and I'm also the chair of the Legislative Black Caucus of Maryland, which is the largest Black caucus in the country. So thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited about our discussion, and thanks everyone for joining.
Perfect. I think that's going to go ahead and kick us off, Aaron, into leading our Q&A. Representative Bauer and Delegate Wilkins, it's a pleasure to, first of all, meet you. I would be interested in knowing what has changed. Representative Bauer, you said, this is an important issue, is, kind of having this conversation and protecting this, and also, Delegate Wilkins, you being in Maryland and in such a space, what has changed in those states since last year?
Well, I'll talk about South Carolina being, a really red state, as I'm sure you're all very aware. But I switched, I was decided to run for office last March. And, I had heard rumblings that the Supreme Court was going to be taking this up. And when I decided to run for office, I said, I'm only going to talk about abortion. People thought I was crazy. They're like, Heather, you can't talk about abortion in South Carolina. I'm like, well, I think you're going to be surprised. And it turns out, I only ran on one issue, and I was the only one to win. This matters to people, and people in South Carolina voted that way. And of course, we had trigger laws waiting to be put in place. Bills have been passed back and forth from the Senate to the House. We are currently in a situation where, and we fought tooth and nail, in the House, and our senators, our amazing senators, filibustered the bill that we sent over to the Senate. And then they passed their bill over to us. And just 3 weeks ago, the governor called us back for a special session. We didn't even have a budget yet, but they called us back for a special session. And I led the filibuster in the House side, and we don't have a standard filibuster, but I filed like over 1,000 amendments with my colleagues, and we just clogged it up and made them sit there and listen to amendment after amendment talking about science and data. So currently it is now going back to, we sued, Planned Parenthood sued for that on that bill. And the governor had signed it the next day. And so there was without telling anyone. So there was about a 12-hour window where a doctor could be, or that morning they could be doing their job, and the next minute they could be tried for malpractice. And I think the degree was a felony at that time in that bill. So it was done under behind closed doors, and very dangerous and extreme, and without even doctors even knowing it was going to be signed and put into law immediately. Planned Parenthood filed that lawsuit that same day, and the court actually agreed to allow our current law to stand for abortion access. And we're going back to Supreme Court for the second time this year on this coming Tuesday. So a lot has happened. We have fought again tooth and nail. They were in session last year until November, about the week before the election, arguing over abortion. So a lot has changed. We're in a supermajority here. Our backs are kind of against the wall. They overturned it in court in January, saying that it was not constitutional regarding privacy. You would think that would stand again, but we will see. And currently, I would say, we are the only southern state that has, the typical abortion. I say typical, but 21 weeks. So we are the only state in the Southeast that is, welcoming those from states around us that will go into place, especially North Carolina. I don't think they go into place until July or August, but we are the only southern state seeing folks. So we will be, unfortunately, Delegate, we will be, counting on y'all to help us if it does get overturned on Tuesday. But it's terrifying. It's very scary being a woman and knowing this is going to impact, the minority communities the most, who are already suffering here. Is it's very sad.
And in Maryland, it certainly is very night and day in terms of what was just described in South Carolina. Something that I think is really interesting is that back in 1991, and by the way, I was born in Kingston, Jamaica. I didn't even move to the US until 1994. But back in 1991, the lawmakers in Maryland actually put into law the right to choose. So it's been on the books in our state since that time. And we, as a state, have had this long history of working to protect the right to choose. It also happens to be that our House and Senate have long been Democratic controlled, but we used to have a Republican governor. So when we talk about changes that have happened over the last year, I have to include the fact that we now have a Democratic governor in Wes Moore, who's also our first Black governor. So we have this trifecta as well that has happened to take place over the last year, actually the last couple of months. And with Maryland being a state that really works to make sure that we uplift and ensure the right of a woman to make those choices for her body, her right to an abortion, we are seeing an influx of women from other states. We don't know the exact numbers because we're actually one of the few states who also refuse to participate in any of the surveillance and data. We don't share that information. So we don't have exact numbers, but our providers have shared with us that there's a huge influx in our state of women who are coming to Maryland, and we want to be a safe haven. A lot of the bills, I know that we'll talk about this a little bit. I'm excited to share some of what we've passed, but part of the purpose is that we want to be that place in our nation where women can come and have a safe and a legal abortion as well. So we have seen that change in the number of women who are coming to Maryland for those abortions, but that also poses a challenge around accessibility. Last year, before the Dobbs decision, we passed a bill to allow more types of providers to be able to give abortions. So nurse midwives, it used to be physicians only, but we expanded the types of doctors last year before the Dobbs decision actually came down. And that ended up being so important that we'd be able to provide more abortions as a safe haven state. The last thing that I wanted to lift up, that it seems like forever ago, but recently we had the fight over the abortion pill nationally, which none of us as state legislators, there's nothing that we can necessarily do around the sudden decision that the abortion pill is unsafe, and they were trying to take it off of the market. And that was a really scary thing. But our governor did act to stockpile abortion pills in Maryland so that there is, if there was to be another legal challenge or something took place, that there are pills that are sort of stockpiled here in our state. So I think it just shows us how much leadership matters, how much the people that we elect who share our values matter, and how having some of the right people in those seats matters. But with the makeup of our state, of course, our politics were able to elect a different type of base here in terms of the colleagues that I serve with. So a lot has changed in the last year, and we are working to just ensure that we continue to be a place that increases access for all women who need that support and who need that access to their abortions.
Thank you both for those thoughtful answers. You both touched on it a little bit, but I'd like to hear how you helped defend the access to abortion over the past year.
Well, first, Delegate, thank you so much for being open arms to other states. We've been called by our governor, a destination state for abortions, abortion on demand. You wouldn't believe the things that I hear every day in that chamber from colleagues who do not understand. And what we've seen and what I've been trying to do, with my emerged sisters or in the community, is just let folks know how the representatives are talking about women and people just needing healthcare. It's quite disturbing. And a lot of folks, even, the gentleman I was running against, people did not know that he was voting that way. And they were shocked at their door, 9 o'clock or 10. I didn't start knocking doors until 10 o'clock on Saturday mornings, but clearly having their first cup of coffee. And I'm coming up to their door and I'm like, hey, I don't want to be talking to you about this, but did you know that he voted to ban abortion? They're like, what? I know him and his family. And, my district's pretty small, about, 40,000 constituents. So it's a tight knit group. So just knocking doors and talking about what they do and how they speak about abortion. And that's something I've done from day one when I first ran for office, being a woman. There aren't many women in the legislature here. I think there's maybe 13% total, and that is Republican women too. So, and that includes the Senate. So we're talking about a very small portion of women that represent us in the state house, in the Senate, and in the chamber that I work in. And then obviously when I had the opportunity to work the filibuster, I had colleagues from both sides being like, hey, are you going to make us sit through the rest of these amendments? I'm like, yes, we are. And I've packed my suitcase. I went in there and to show a message, and we walked out with, I had an idea to walk out with all the amendments in boxes right after session was adjourned one day. And that TikTok went viral because it was a pretty poignant message. And we walked in there and they were like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, we're just dropping some paperwork, just to know that we're not scared, even though we're outnumbered. We have to prove a point for our constituents and for the Southeast that we're not going to give up. And it didn't go the way we wanted to. We knew how the vote was going to go, but we don't lose hope. And we also know that we have a new Supreme Court. We're the only state in the country that does not have a woman on the Supreme Court. So it's tough, but we hope the president will stand next Tuesday, but I will never give up. That's for sure.
Wow, that's amazing. And I remember seeing that TikTok and sharing it and just being very, very proud. It literally sent chills seeing you all stand up and walking in with those amendments. So that was, your fight has definitely been a really important one. And women across the country are seeing that. I think it's helping to empower many. So thank you again for that leadership. So in Maryland, we did pass several bills this legislative session, and I do want to lift up our Speaker of the House, Adrienne Jones, who's the first woman speaker in the history of our country and the first African American, and our Senate President as well, and Governor Moore, who really led the offense in just ensuring that we passed a couple of bills this session, as well as Senator Ariana Kelly, who's been our just main champion in our state around reproductive justice for a number of years now. Before this was a hot issue, she was the one who was always talking about it and lifting up reproductive justice. So I just wanted to share a couple of the bills that we passed this session. One is that we are proposing a constitutional amendment that will be on the ballot next year, so that not only will it be in law in Maryland, but part of our Constitution, the right for a person to make their own choices over their reproductive health. And so we are fully expecting that to pass with a yes. And we'll be working to energize our base, turn out the vote, and ensure that that ballot measure is successful next year. So that will be on the ballot in Maryland. That was a bill that we passed to put on the ballot. We also passed bills regarding privacy and additional protections. We actually put reproductive health care in its own class. It's now called legally protected healthcare. And what that means is that anything that is considered legally protected healthcare in Maryland, there's specific regulations on not sharing data, on making sure that patient data is secure. It sort of puts it in its own category, anything that is considered legally protected. And so we're working with the Maryland Department of Health to ensure that all types and forms of what we would consider to be reproductive health care is under that class. And our providers will have to act accordingly to ensure that that information is safe. Similarly, under the umbrella of privacy, we did pass legislation to prohibit disclosure of data or any types of diagnosis, procedures, medications related to abortions and reproductive health care. And it also ensures that our providers in Maryland are protected from any civil and criminal liability, no matter what may be happening in other states. So, Representative Bauer, we talked about perhaps there are South Carolina women that are coming to this area, that our providers in law and Maryland law won't be criminally held liable, even if your law may say otherwise, in terms of those women being able to get that access. So that was a really important bill that we passed. And a final one that I wanted to flag relates to reproductive care on college campuses. We actually passed legislation that requires our public institutions to put plans in place to have reproductive health care plans, where they have a process on how their students can get access to reproductive care. That includes contraceptive care, as well as getting referrals for abortions. If a student comes to them and needs an abortion, that there is a plan on how they can get referred to the appropriate place. So all of our public institutions will have to have plans as it relates to reproductive health care on their campuses and make those referrals and have that access for that their students need. So those were some of the ways that we worked this session, following on Dobbs and the overturn of Roe, to ensure that access and privacy, and that we're continuing to maintain that abortion rights and abortion care in our state.
Wow. I mean, I think the more you talk about what you've been doing in a year span of time, right, to protect women it's insane to me. Representative Bauer, I wanted to touch a little bit more on something you said. You said that you're in the fight with your Emerge sisters, right? And outside of giving you community and folks to be in this fight with you, how has Emerge equipped you essentially with the tools to be able to do this work? And I think we can go with Delegate Wilkins first this time, and then we'll close with you, Representative Bauer, or we'll give you the floor, Representative Bauer.
Awesome, thank you. And something that is really awesome about being in Emerge and serving in the Maryland General Assembly is that a bunch of the women from my Emerge class, I serve with them now. We ran and we won. And so even some of the women who sponsored the bills that I mentioned, Delegate Nicole Williams was the sponsor of one of the bills related to privacy. Delegate Stephanie Smith was a sponsor of another piece of legislation, the college campus one, actually. And so I'm really proud that it is our Emerge women in Maryland that are helping to lead on these bills and lead on this fight. And I work day in and day out with them in this work. And we are always building on the trainings from Emerge, whether it's the public speaking class. We had an awesome public speaking class. And so when we're having those debates on the floor and we're working to protect reproductive freedom, because make no mistake, we still have to really work hard to pass these bills in the sense of beating back the Republican rhetoric on the floor and, our Right to Life Maryland, people who come to our committees and harass us or who are outside. And so there's always still this battle, because even if you're a safe haven state, there are always going to be those anti-choice people, including some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. And so some of the skills that we've learned in Emerge and the network that we've built, we're able to stand strong and stand together. And I'm glad that I'm not the only Emerge alum in the General Assembly, because I know that I have my Emerge sisters there as well, who are on the front lines of working together to really ensure that women have this access. So that has been a really amazing experience for me as well.
That's incredible. What I would say, it's so different being in South Carolina, hearing what you've been able to pass. And so congrats, that's amazing. We'll get there someday here.
Yes, we will.
And it's going to be because of the Emerge sisters that I went through the class with back in 2019. And the women that I went through Emerge with, they are running county parties. They are running field organizations. They are working for campaigns that come here. They run the stuff here. Let's be honest. They run the show behind the scenes, and they help me tremendously, even in my campaign, cutting turf and helping organize things. A lot of them are county council folks or city council folks across the state. One of the main super volunteers on my campaign, she's a county councilwoman, also went through the first class in South Carolina through Emerge. She's also the Southeast Regional Director for Planned Parenthood. So super intertwined in this issue and in everything regarding politics to help Democrats win here.
That's awesome. We've heard a lot tonight about what you've done, which is amazing, but I think a lot of us are looking to what's next in this fight and what we can do. So I'd like to hear what your next steps are in this fight.
I think for me, continuing to listen to women and their stories in terms of what's next, what bills we may pass. I'm sure that reproductive justice will still be a centerpiece next session in 2024. And the work product, though, will be based on what our women in Maryland, our women who are coming into the state and seeking abortions, their stories and the impact that the Roe v. Wade overturning has had on them, and ensuring that we are passing legislation that's based on what women are saying and listening to them. So that's definitely a piece of what's next. And lifting up their stories. I think that the more that people all across the country hear the specific ways that reproductive health is healthcare, that these are life-changing decisions, these are life or death decisions that women and their families should be able to make, and lifting up the very specific stories that are taking place is really, really critical, because we cannot allow those who are detractors, those who are anti-choice, to be out there and be loud without us sharing the very specific impacts and stories as well. So those are the things that I think are really critical in terms of what's next. Are women leading this fight and those impacted leading this fight, and lifting up the stories of those impacted as well.
And I would say for me in South Carolina, given the situation we are in our chamber, is that we have to flip more seats. Our backs are against the wall. We cannot do much, to be very honest. So we need to flip seats. And so I'm working with the Emerge leadership here in South Carolina, our party, even our Democratic caucus and the Black caucus too, which I also serve on, to target those top zones and top districts to make sure we flip seats. And then selfishly, I was the most competitive race in the state. I can't lose next year. We have 2-year terms. So I have to win next year. So we have to win my seat and then a few other really competitive seats across the state. And then we have to win. We have to start with a plan, which I'm working with leadership on, and we have to win seats. So thank goodness Emerge is doing a lot of classes here this summer in preparation for next year, and they have their hand directly in the strategy. And I'll be helping with those trainings too, as much as I can, to encourage the women that go through the program to run fiercely. And, you can run on abortion and win. And I proved that. So being tough with messaging, I think, is really important. So that's going to be one of my things to do over the next 1.5 years until filing closes in March, is to really encourage, to be bold and to share stories, because people that I work with, they don't care. And they also do not represent the majority of the views in South Carolina. So we have to vote them out. So that's what I'll be working on.
Absolutely. I think, messaging is absolutely important. And I have a question here that I'm going to filter from the audience that is similar to something about messaging. How would you suggest we continue this conversation in our own circles? What language or messaging works best for speaking with folks who are opposed to us on these issues, or folks who don't want to listen, or folks who feel like they have enough information and they don't want to hear what we have to add to the conversation? How do you suggest we continue that conversation?
I can start. And I think Delegate Wilkins mentioned that a lot, but telling people stories, not every pregnancy is the same. And speaking about, especially in South Carolina, I would hit on how dangerous it is to be pregnant here in the state. We have one of the highest infant mortality rates, one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the entire country, particularly with Black women in our state. So really talking about stats and specific examples, and like Delegate said, lift up the stories that of that have been so brave to come forward and share their such personal stories with the state of South Carolina. I think we can win over hearts and minds. And sadly, a lot of times it does take something personal happening to you in order for that to change. But I think that's really important, is just mentioning, we're not a spreadsheet. You don't input numbers and we have a baby. Like we're humans, we're bodies, and every pregnancy is different and unique, and it should be treated as such. And then in South Carolina, we are extreme as rape victims have to go to the police chief and report the rape, even if they're 10 years old. Like what 10-year-old is going to be able to get into a car and make their way to the police station to even know that they're raped, So having these conversations, we're gonna have to do a little bit at a time here in our state, but peel the onion and be like, do you think a 10-year-old would know how to call Uber? Do they even have a cell phone? Do they even know what sex is at that time? So just starting small and breaking it down, because at this point, it's the bill, if it does hold, is going to be detrimental. And, I think at that point, I think every Democrat should be running on this issue. That's my personal belief. But yeah, so that's what I would say. Thank you.
And I think that's absolutely right. I think that a lot of the opposition, they blame women for being promiscuous and for being irresponsible. And so when you have that thinking and that lens, it makes it easy, I guess, for you to be anti-choice. So when you share the specific stories and lift up the examples of how this is actually healthcare, this is actually life or death. Pregnancy is very dangerous, and we have to ensure that women have the opportunity to make the decisions that are best for them. I think is really important. And at the same time, you know, women should not have to have the government tell them that they must go through with a pregnancy. Like flip that freedom, freedom from government on them as well. I think that that can be an effective message at times, but I concur with everything that Representative Bauer said.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much for those answers. We're going to close out with one last question from the chat. Regardless of the state you live in, fighting for abortion rights and seeing all of the hate and pushback can be really hard. How do you both stay sane during this time and keep motivated when things feel hopeless?
I'd be happy to go. I have an amazing support network here. So the woman who works at Planned Parenthood, we can call and vent, and then we'll go and do yoga together or take a walk by the river and just kind of get out of our heads a little bit, because, you know, when you're really wanting to serve, you know, you want to give it your all. And it really does take stepping back a bit. And like, I just came from the gym tonight, so I try to make time for myself and just unwind and try not to look at the news too much all the time. I try to give myself a certain amount of screen time, but it can be, you know, as an elected official, I try to stay on top of everything and know what's going on, even in other states, because it does impact, as we saw with this decision, that impact our state immediately. So I try to be on top of everything, but also create that safe place where people get it. The people that are in the trenches and I can call and be like, did you hear what they just said? You know, being able to just talk with someone who understands and is in it. You know, I can talk to my family. They're like, what do you mean? You know, they don't really understand what's going on in the trenches, but having those folks in my life has been really great.
I think probably everyone on this line is some way involved in politics or wants to run. And I definitely would give the advice of taking those mental breaks, whether you can physically get out of town or just mentally get away. It's so important for us to care for ourselves so that we can continue to advocate for others and for our community. So for me, like clockwork, when session ends, I am on a plane somewhere, okay? Don't write, don't call, don't text me. I am out of the country for, you know, at least 5 days, just rejuvenating, getting myself together for the work that we'll do in the interim. And so whatever that is for you, it might not be going out of the country, but there might be other ways that you can find to rejuvenate and take care of yourself. So always include that on your campaigns and your legislative work, and so on and so forth, because we have to make sure that we're able to live to fight another day by taking care of ourselves.
Well, thank you. So that wraps up our Q&A, also wraps up our event. And before we go, I just have to thank both Representative Bauer and Delegate Wilkins for your leadership, your bravery, and of course, your service. And then also thank everyone for joining us tonight. I wish we could stay longer. We'll definitely have to do more of these, but we want to respect your time. So everyone have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.